Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Before we get into the episode, just want to let you know that this is the free version of the podcast, and all that means is that we are way behind where I'm at in Patreon. So if you are loving this podcast and you need more John Constantine in your life, definitely go check us out at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you'll get access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've recorded so far. And also you'll get access to the exclusive episodes of the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books main podcast. So if any of that sounds good to you, definitely go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up there. And with that out of the way, let's get into the issue. Today, we are reading Hellblazer number 28, and just a little catch up on what's been going on. The last three issues were not part of this story arc. We are back with the Family Man story arc. But the cool thing, and what normally doesn't happen in a comic series, is when there's fill-in issues, they usually don't acknowledge that those fill-in issues happened and like that any time has passed. But in Hellblazer, they actually do. So this issue actually picks up the Family Man arc, and it actually acknowledges that it is 3 months after the first one, which was issue 24. So what happened in issue 24 is John Constantine found out that his friend, who is like a rare commodities dealer, was dealing in serial killer goods. So he was finding and selling actual like crime scene evidence or mementos that were from actual serial killers and selling them to people who were interested in that stuff. And John actually interacted with the Family Man serial killer when the Family Man stopped by Jerry O'Flynn's house where John was staying, and unknowingly gave the Family Man his next target, which was a family named the Lucases. So the Family Man actually went and killed that family, and that is where we're picking up after that murder, and John just getting back to London after kind of hiding his head in the sand and running away from his involvement in those murders. And first things first, we got the cover here. We see two pairs of hands clutching a set of dolls, a man, a woman, and a child who are all headless, and also a Constantine doll that is not headless. And we start off on the first page with kind of an origin story of the Family Man. We see someone looking through the keyhole of a door. It's a first-person view, so we're seeing it through that person's eyes. And what we see is a woman and a man lying in bed. It seems that they have maybe just had intercourse and they're sleeping. And the woman is laying kind of above the sheets with her blouse open and her chest showing. And the man is face down asleep and his hand is grabbing on one of her breasts. Then we see a hand open the door and walk into the room. And then the art switches from first person to third person. And we see that it is a boy who has come in the room, and he's kind of looking at the couple in horror. And as he does, he raises his hand, and we see that there's a hammer in it. And he raises it high above his head and brings it down and smashes the head of the man. And that action causes the man's hand to grasp very hard at the woman's breast. So she wakes up, but she doesn't really realize what happened. She's kind of still drowsy and possibly like she's been drinking because she doesn't really understand what's going on. And then she sees the boy staring at her and she says, "Samuel, is that you?" And he responds, "You're so beautiful, mother. I wish I didn't have to love you." And she still hasn't realized that the man next to her has his head smashed in. So she says, "It was just a bad dream. Give me a kiss and go back to bed before you wake your father." And when she says that, he lifts the hammer kind of sideways because she's sitting up in front of him, and he proceeds to beat her to death as well. And after the deed is done, he says, "That's right, mother. A bad dream, that's all. It's over now. Good night, I love you." And then as he kisses his mom's face, he hears a noise, and he turns around to see a silhouetted figure of John Constantine holding a noose and looking at him very angrily. And the boy says, "No, please, it wasn't me. I found them like this. It's their fault. They should have come home on time. Please, I'm all alone now." And then on the next page, we see an old man wake up like in a fit. And from issue 24, we know that this is the Family Man serial killer. And apparently all that was just a bad dream. And we find out that his name is Mr. Morris as a nurse comes up to him and says, Mr. Morris, wake up. You're having a restless night, shouting in your sleep." And then she brings him something to drink to calm him down. She says it's called Horlicks, but I don't know what that is. It might be alcohol or milk or something. And Mr. Morris says, "Thank you, Betty. You're very, very kind. And then we get 3 panels that are just solid black, but there is narration over it. And we see the narration says, blind, no force, no influence, numb in an oil bath world, no form, no texture, no sense but smell, sweet and sour, the smell of piss and blood, of death. Remembered fingers scramble but find no coffin lid. Terror wraps on nothing but the soul. And then there's 2 very loud knocking sounds, and then all of a sudden John Constantine wakes up because he was having a nightmare. And it seems he was woken up by someone knocking on his door. And when John answers, he has a very horrified look on his face as someone we don't see says, "Oh, hello, Mr. Constantine. I'm Lou Case from Houndstown. I'm very sorry to disturb you." And then we get a panel that shows what John is seeing from like the back of him. And it is the dead family of the Lucases. And the husband is introducing his family to him. He says, "Oh, we've never met. This is my family, June, Sarah, and Mark." And they are the dead versions of that family. So their faces are all bloody and cut up. The children's like eyes are missing and stuff. It's very, very creepy and grotesque. And John asks the man, "What do you want?" And the man replies, "I don't want you to think me ungrateful after all you've done for us, but we couldn't think of anywhere else to go. You see, our house is all full of blood and policemen now. It's been a bit sudden, you know, and the children are very tired." And as he's saying this, he's kind of walking into the house and like putting his hand on John's shoulder. And John is just trying to move back further and further away from the ghost of the husband, or maybe like a vision John is seeing of him. And so John actually falls down like while he's stumbling backwards. And the man says, "Please, Mr. Constantine, I'm sure if you stop to think about it, you'll agree it's only fair. After all, it was you who sent him to us, wasn't it? You know who. Don't worry, we're not going to sue you or anything. It's really not at all unpleasant being dead. It just takes a bit of getting used to. We'll be very quiet. You hardly know we're here. Perhaps you could help my wife with young Sarah." And as he says that, the wife walks in behind him and hands John the dead daughter, who's still covered in blood. And she says to John, "Thank you. Careful, don't spill her. She's still got some blood left. You wouldn't want to stain your lovely clothes." So it seems that much like all of John's friends that have died in the past, which used to haunt John all the time because he basically got them killed, now he has the ghosts of this family haunting him. And we see the name of this issue is Thicker Than Water, and it is written by Jamie Delano with art by Ron Tyner and Kevin Walker. Then we cut to the old folks' home where Mr. Morris, the family man serial killer, is having a nice chat with an old lady that also lives in the old folks' home. And it seems that he gets along well with everybody. Everybody likes him. Everybody's like, "Oh, Mr. Morris, don't go," as he gets up to leave. And it seems like he's actually moving out of the old folks' home today because one of the nurses says, "Come along, Mr. Morris. Have you got everything? Tickets, money?" And he's like, "Yes, thank you. Goodbye, Miss Etheridge. Goodbye, Betty, Norma. I'll miss you all. You've been like family to me." And then the old lady he was talking to says, "Such a nice old gentleman. He was a policeman, you know." And the nurses standing around the old woman say, "Yes, but I didn't know he had a sister. According to the next of kin list, he hasn't. Poor love. It must be ghastly to be old and all alone. And he has such terrible dreams." So as Mr. Morris gets into his taxi, he kind of evilly looks out the window at them as they wave goodbye. And it seems like he's dropping his facade now because in his mind he says, "Idiots, stupid cattle, shit people." And then he tells the cabbie to take him to a pub near the police station. And then we cut back to John in his apartment where he's shaving and waking up from the horrible visit from the ghosts. And the narration says, "The dream was brutally obvious. Lou Cass, Lucas, Houndstown, Dogsthorpe. The family man killed them. I sent him there and he cut strips off them with a bayonet. I talked to him. I shook his hand. I know what he looks like and I know what he does. It's been 3 months. Why haven't I done anything? I burned all the evidence. I didn't go to the police. I haven't even consciously thought about him since. Why? Because I'm scared. Why am I scared? Because he's old and he's been killing people for years? No, it's because I liked him. Before I knew, something that he said perhaps, a gesture? Just for a second, I thought I saw myself behind those eyes, trapped, old in a ruined fantasy. I have to find him, don't I? The poison must be drawn, analyzed, an antidote discovered." And then we cut to Mr. Morris, who is now at that bar, and he's going over the series of events that happened when he met Constantine in O'Flynn's house. And the narration says, "First rule of the game, no witnesses. He should have killed him there and then in O'Flynn's house. He should have gutted him, He should have reamed those supercilious eyes from their sockets. Why hadn't he? He'll have to put things right. A dream of mother was a danger dream. It was a bad mistake. And then another man at the bar interrupts Mr. Morris's thoughts, and it turns out that's a policeman that is currently working the family man case. And like the nurse said as Mr. Morris was leaving, Mr. Morris is a retired policeman, and this is the local pub that the police hang out in after work. So as they get to talking, of course, Mr. Morris is asking, how the case is going. Do they have any leads? And the policeman doesn't really give him that much information. But then Mr. Morris changes the subject and kind of makes it seem that he's like a private eye right now, like that's how he's getting money. And he asks his policeman friend to do him a favor and run a name for him. And the name he wants him to run is John Constantine. So it seems like Mr. Morris has decided that he's going to fix his mistake of not killing John when he first saw him in the house. So he needs to track him down and find out where this John Constantine lives. Because if you remember, John has since moved out of the O'Flynn house. So his friend runs the name and gets back a bunch of information about John that we kind of already knew, but he tells Mr. Morris that he should stay away from this guy. He says, "Go easy with this one, okay? He's young and nasty. There's no current trace or wanted tags on him, but he's always in the background. He did 2 years in Ravenscar after a highly dodgy accidental death of a minor. We tried to find known associates, but they nearly all checked out dead. We have got a father listed, though, Thomas. There's an address in Liverpool." So with that, the policeman leaves, and now he's given Mr. Morris way too much info about John, and as Mr. Morris walks away, he has a very evil smile on his face. So then we come back to John, who is now visiting his buddy Chaz, who used to be a taxi driver, but apparently Chaz sold his taxi after John guaranteed that the apocalypse was going to happen while they were in Scotland. So Chaz figured, I might as well sell this thing and get a bunch of money. And of course, as we know, the apocalypse did not happen. Chaz says, "Anyway, if it weren't for you, I never would have sold me cab. The missus gave me hell over that. I looked a right fool, didn't I?" And then he imitates him talking to his wife and saying, "But darling, we might as well go to the Bahamas. The world's going to end. John said so." And then jokingly, John gives him a kiss on the cheek and says, "It's all right, Chaz. I still love you." And then we cut to Mr. Morris, who is taking a train to Liverpool. And of course, he is stuck sitting next to a very loud mother with 2 children. And the children are freaking out and crying and stuff. And since Mr. Morris is chatting with her and seemingly nice, she allows him to pick up one of the children. And we get some narration over these panels that says, "Unbearable love for the witless suffering of beasts, compassion squirming, live muscle splintering in its shell. Softness demands steel. Ravage the vulnerability, pierce it again and again and again, deaden it with scars. Soon the sweet salt taste, but not now. Now, chill the love, freeze it. This is not a safe place." So it seems like he really wants to kill these kids and the mother, but this is too open and it's not safe to do something like that. And plus, he's saving it for later. Then we cut to John, who, after talking to Chaz, is going into some sort of sex shop. And the reason he's here is because the person who was ordering these special artifacts from serial killers was a man named Mr. Hackett. And I can't remember exactly how he knows this name, but it did happen in Mr. O'Flynn's house when Mr. Morris came to pick up his package that had the Lucas family information on it. So that is why he has come here. This is the business establishment of Mr. Hackett. So John is able to get entry into the back room through the secretary. And as he walks in, we see Mr. Hackett watching some sort of movie. And John had told the secretary that he was Mr. O'Flynn. So Mr. Hackett is expecting Mr. O'Flynn, and his back is towards the door. So as the door opens, he says, "Hey, Jerry, where you been? I haven't heard from you for a while. Come on, tell me what you make of this. Is it genuine Bangkok torture snuff or a Taiwan fake? There's no soundtrack, otherwise I'd know for sure. You can't mistake a scream with real pain in it." So John already knew this guy was a scumbag because he's buying serial killer artifacts, but this kind of clinches it, and it puts John in pretty much a mood to not give a fuck about this guy at all. So in the man's office next to where he was sitting watching the movie, there is a fish tank full of eels, and John pulls the power cord out of the projector and throws it on the ground at the feet of Mr. Hackett while he leans the eel tank over like it's going to spill water. And John actually goes one step further because he insinuates to the man that he is actually the family man killer. And this freaks Mr. Hackett out pretty badly. So when John asks to see the man's serial killer memento room, Mr. Hackett lets him in right away to this back room in his office. And this is where he keeps all the serial killer mementos that he has bought from Jerry O'Flynn over the years. And John is kind of sickened by this whole macabre museum that he's collected. And he says, "Why do you hoard these trophies? Aren't you as guilty as those who take them?" And Mr. Hackett responds, "Sure, yeah. And ain't everyone who reads the crime reports or studied murder for a psychology degree. Everyone's fascinated with random death. It's a mystery of life. Danger from another world. Even the police keep a black museum. I'm no different from them." And John yells back, "Yes, you are. You don't just want to know about it. You want to watch it, to be involved. Sometimes I bet you even want to do it. But you're so scared. So you do it in your head, on your own. You smell, Mr. Hackett. You smell like a sick baby." And now that John has seen all of this stuff, he realizes there's not really any information on the family man here. But before he's about to leave, Mr. Hackett, who still thinks John is the family man killer, says, "This came for you in the mail. I was going to give it to Jerry to pass it on, but he never showed up." And then he hands John what looks kind of like a wedding invitation or a postcard or something. And John looks at it and it reads, "The family man is formally invited to attend as a guest of honor to the first annual convention of serial murderers of the USA." And this is kind of cool because it ties into a story arc in Sandman where there's like a serial killer convention in America going on. So apparently the family man in this story arc also got an invitation to go to that convention. So as John pockets the card and begins to walk out, Mr. Hackett says, "You're going to kill me, aren't you?" And his back is turned to John. And John responds, "Would that make you happy then, to be a famous killer's victim?" And Mr. Hackett responds, "Yes, do it now." And still with his back turned to Constantine, he kind of pushes himself against one of the walls in this museum of death. And he's just waiting there in anticipation as John walks out. And Mr. Hackett yells out, "I know you're going to. The family man never leaves any witnesses." And then we cut to Mr. Morris, who is cleaning up a bunch of blood, what looks to be a crime scene of a murder he just committed. And we see there's narration saying, "Waiting for the early winter darkness to conceal his departure, the family man calms his bubbling mind with cleaning up. It's difficult. There's no bath and the sink's full of dishes. He hadn't planned on this, but as they talked, he'd felt it rising. The love, swelling him with insufferable sensitivity. The love was undeniable. The pathetic existence of this degraded molecule of humanity had woken it, wailing for comfort. He works efficiently while the warm rush is still in him before the cold. Dull ache of his ruptured armor's healing devours his energy. No witnesses, but the policeman had given him this address. Make it look like a robbery. No big deal in Liverpool, and the investigation will just stay local. And even if they do question him, who will suspect?" And the panels under this narration are showing more and more of the scene of the crime. We're seeing him wipe off a white coat that is on the wall and also a very long knife that he has in his hands. And then we see a man on the floor. We don't know who this man is exactly, but he is covered in blood and is obviously dead. And this being Liverpool, like he said, means this is probably Constantine's father. So after he cleans up, he gets his briefcase and he puts all his instruments and jacket in there and then walks out the door. And then we get a flashback of what happened before the murder took place. We see Mr. Morris knocking on the door and Thomas Constantine answering, and Thomas lets him in because Mr. Morris lies and says that he has a daughter that is pregnant from John Constantine, and he insinuates that John has left his pregnant daughter and he's looking for John to make an honest woman out of his daughter. So as the old men talk, either Mr. Morris asks or Thomas just volunteers all this family information about John. The narration reads, "Thomas Constantine's was a stunted life, born into the promise of labor. His father had been a stevedore and Thomas grew to that work. He had 6 brothers. His mother, broken, died young. There was work for a while, then the depression years of dole, cues, drinks, and fights. Eventually, the ships came back to Liverpool with food to feed the war, and for a time, there was more work than a man could do. Then, a near decade with no steady job, going hungry for the child. The family was all there was. Finally, another child, John. Too big and overdue, he killed his mother. Now he's killed his father too." And then we cut from narration to the actual conversation of the old men, and John's dad is saying, "Tainted, waste of good air, nothing but a cheap, flashy little crook." And Mr. Morris asks, "You never see him?" And his dad responds, "Not for 20 years. Sometimes he sends a few quid through the post when his conscience pricks him. He says he wins it on horses. Got one last week." And Mr. Morris asks, "Was there an address?" And Thomas responds, "You know what they say, don't you? Blood's thicker than water." So basically he's telling the old man, "I'm not going to tell you his address because, he's still my son, even though I hate him." And then cleverly, Mr. Morris brings up the daughter again and how he just wants John to take responsibility for his actions. And this moves Thomas to tell him that the card was postmarked from London, Peckham. And that's all Mr. Morris wanted. And he stands up like he's about to leave, but he actually opens his briefcase and takes out a raincoat. And Thomas looks out the window and says, "Oh, is it raining out?" And we know what happens from there because that was the same coat that he was cleaning the blood off of in the last scene. So then we cut to John, who's coming up with his own plan of how to get the family man to reveal himself again. And what he comes up with is making an anonymous call to the police and telling them that Mr. Hackett is actually the killer because obviously he's got all that evidence in that secret room. And then once the police arrest Mr. Hackett and all the press come to take pictures of him, John will kind of photobomb the background so you can see him dead smack next to Mr. Hackett. And he's hoping that the family man will read the paper, see him and Mr. Hackett in the picture, and realize that he needs to take care of John Constantine because obviously John is a witness. So all of that does happen, and John is pretty pleased with himself. He thinks it's a pretty clever way he came up with to get the family man to reveal himself. But he doesn't know yet that the family man is already onto him and has actually killed his father. So then we cut to Mr. Morris, the family man, who is about to eat dinner at a local, what looks like Indian restaurant. And the narration says, "The family man is hungry, hungry as a hunter." So as he's being served his food, Mr. Morris is eyeing the wife and child of the owner of the establishment as they walk back into a private room. In what seems to be a bit of luck for the family man, a couple of patrons are harassing the owner and calling him a bunch of racist names, saying they're not going to pay the $15 for what they're calling curried dog food. And the owner's arguing with them and saying he's going to call the police. So he's distracted. So Mr. Morris takes this opportunity and he walks back into the private room. And we are just seeing it from the outside. So we're just seeing the argument between the patrons and the owner as the room door is shut and stays on that shut door for a while. Long enough, in fact, that the argument is done by the time he leaves the room before the owner realizes that Mr. Morris was in the private area. So Mr. Morris acts like he's just getting up from his table and finishing his meal, and the owner is apologizing for the disturbance and the young people being bad families and stuff. And he asks, "Oh, was the food good?" And Mr. Morris says, "Yes, fine, thank you." And he pays the owner and walks out. And as he does, the owner yells a very loud scream that is coming out of the window of the apartment above where the private door led to. And then we cut to the next day where John is hanging out at Chaz's new workplace again, and he's reading the morning paper where we do see an actual photo of the family man killer suspect held, and we see it is Mr. Hackett, and you can totally see John Constantine's face. So he's all happy, and he's thinking that the family man's totally going to come after him now, and he's going to be ready. He's just got to prepare. But then while he's sitting there, a news broadcast comes on the TV, and it says, "Reports are just coming in of a multiple killing in an Asian restaurant tonight in Peckham, South London. Despite earlier confirmed police reports of the arrest of the suspect in Soho, first indications are that this is the work of the family man." And upon hearing that, John is having a realization, his cigarette's falling out of his mouth as he stands kind of flabbergasted watching the TV. And he says, "Shit, he's already here." And then we get some narration of John's, and he's saying, "He's ahead of me, and he wants me to know it. How did he find me? How close is he? Christ, and I thought I was being clever. I thought that I'd have time to work out what to do when he got here." So John runs out of Chaz's work and back to his new apartment, and the narration continues, "This is real. He's trying to kill me. I'll have to fight him. Not in my mind, in the flesh. I'm going to have to beat him. And then what? Arrest him? Jesus, this is serious. No wonder I've been hiding from it. Murder. It's got a pulse of its own. Slow, cold electricity. If it comes to it, Constantine, do you really think you can do it? Face to face, eyeball to eyeball, teeth to muscle, steel to bone?" And as he says this, he actually has a loaf of bread next to his bed, and he sees there's a bread knife next to it, and he takes the bread knife, and the narration says, "What's the drill? With knives again? Stab and twist. stab, and he stabs it into the bread and twist. And as he says that, the bread kind of falls apart in his hand and he goes, "Oh, hell," which I guess is kind of insinuating that he's not going to be able to fight this guy hand to hand. And that is the end of the issue. And wow, I really like this issue. It was a really fun and kind of a good build-up, especially after like some of the other really long story arcs. This one seems to be kind of moving along quickly. And also we're getting a lot of history and lore about John Constantine thrown in, which is always fun. So with that, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestransandcomicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.